So 10 years ago, you achieved a landmark judgment for a Gitmo detainee,
Yes.
and yet there are still members in Gitmo suffering and continuing the illegal detention. Do you see a hope that Gitmo be ever closed and all the detainees will see the light of freedom?
Yes, I do, actually. What Hamdan, the Hamdan versus Rumsfeld stood for was the president can't change the rules that govern international armed conflict. That he can't change the rules that govern the detention of prisoners. Now, Guantanamo Bay has been founded on the idea that we are at war, but it has never accepted the metaphysical war on terrorism. The justices expressed great skepticism to that. Now, one forgets on Guantanamo Bay that we have been in war in Afghanistan now for 15 years. The Guantanamo detainees, as far as I'm aware, all of them now, were taken in the context of that conflict. And though it may seem extraordinarily unfair, and I think a lot of them are still held without a real, on a questionable basis, the underlying justification for Guantanamo Bay is the fact that we are still at war and you can hold prisoners during time of war. So, and the courts have accepted, but even in the original case, they said that they held in Hamdi, which case that preceded mine, was that they could hold a detainee during time of war. That was well established, and that there was war in Afghanistan, and that was well established. And the United States participation in Afghanistan, though not nearly at the level it was, still continues. However, I believe that there will be a very strong argument that when that war ends, and it will end, and it is winding down now, U.S. participation, that the authority for U.S. to continue to hold prisoners in Guantanamo Bay, absent convictions for war crimes. You can be held past the war to be tried for a war crime, or if you're convicted of a war crime. But to hold without trial will go away at that point. So, Hamdan didn't free people. What Hamdan said was you have to follow the rules. Now, in some instances, they have followed the rules. Following the rules has gotten a lot of guys out. It hasn't gotten everybody out, and it remains difficult. But I think that, what's clear, whatever the current administration may say, their ability under the Supreme Court's past rulings is they can't change the rules for putting someone there.
With Donald Trump questioning judges and making decisions such as travel ban, which outright appears to be against American Constitution, do you think it's time for American lawyers in numbers to stand up for those who aren't receiving justice rather than few examples?
I think that what you're seeing is a revival on the part of it, is that the legal system comes to life when they understand that there's a threat to the system. And I think that the current administration is having the same impact inside the legal community that the Bush administration did with Guantanamo Bay. When we started Guantanamo Bay, there were very few. At the height of Guantanamo Bay, I used to say you couldn't be a cool kid on Wall Street in a Wall Street firm if you didn't have at least 2 Guantanamo clients. So the level of representation of the Guantanamo clients is unparalleled in American history. Mr. Hamdan's defense, if you put it all together, was the most expensive defense in American history. For an individual. His defense, if you valued it out, everybody gave their time for free, so it's not that it was paid for by him. But if you valued it out, we estimated that it was somewhere between $10 and $15 million for an individual. I will tell you that at CLCMA, the day after the election of the current administration, we got more calls than we'd ever gotten, but they weren't from Muslims, they were from lawyers who want to help. And I suspect, as they did immediately on the travel ban in other places, where the courts are threatened, where the rule of law is threatened, lawyers stand up for it. And I am heartened by that and confident by it. And I also think that, the courts, as I say, is what I want to, My mentor, colleague, and friend, Neil Katyal, who's currently representing the state of Hawaii in this, famously said to me, "We just want to be for the status quo. If we're not changing anything, courts don't like to change things. If we're for the status quo, we're likely to win." And in this case, maintaining religious liberties is the status quo.
After defending so many high-profile cases in your career span, what suggestion do you want to give to the aspiring Muslim legal professionals in dealing with the pressure from the government, media, and alt-right activists?
Sure. My advice to anyone who goes into this is, and part is, there are three things I think that are necessary to success. Number one is know thy limitations and make friends. The other part is no one beats the world alone. You've got to get friends. And I didn't achieve the success I did by myself. I achieved it with partnerships with Neil Katyal, Perkins Coie, and Linda Moreno, Josh Stratel, many people. So network, network, and network. The next suggestion is know what you care about. For me, I've never argued, and my personal hero is the great lawyer Michael Tiger. And Michael Tiger said, "Never take a case you don't believe in." And so if you're going to pick what you believe in. And the last thing is, what you can't worry about is what is this going to do for me? Because a lawyer represents people. They don't represent themselves. You want your representation to speak well of you, but you don't want, your representation is not for your benefit. It's for the benefit of the client. And if you remember that, and you believe in the case, and you network and you make friends, you can't help but be a success.
Recently, in an extrajudicial attack in Yemen, a young girl, an American citizen, was killed.
Yes.
Do you think such cases can be taken up legally? Both the current President Trump and the past President Obama have approved such extrajudicial killings of American citizens.
They have, and they're troubling, and it's a question in this area in the quasi-war. To date, the courts have been unwilling to enter into that area of presidential power. The courts, and this is in the status quo, it's a difficult question, and whether this is a better addressed political question. I'm well aware of the raid that you're referring to, and I don't believe that the individual was a target. I also believe that the raid was poorly planned, and that poor planning, and before we put on a lot of things, poor planning on it. I think that this is a personal opinion in the political part to point out. The collateral damage damages us far more than we believe. In my experience in places like Yemen and places like Afghanistan and the mountains of Pakistan, etc., any insurgency, and we are fighting in insurgencies there, is about hearts and minds. In the end, the only way you can win an insurgency is for the other side to stop fighting. Because there will be an unlimited number of people to fight you. Okay? The way we win is they stop fighting. That's it. And when you kill innocent children in the process, no matter what your intent was, no matter how pure it was, it's difficult to get the other side to stop fighting. I think I'm heartened by the new chief of security who came in. I'm heartened by some of the people that came in. I'm particularly, I think that I want to give credit where credit is due, and the Trump administration's national security advisor is worlds away from where we were. And that is an extraordinary step in the right direction. He is a fantastic military officer. I know that personally. And I have great faith that he would have been much more skeptical. And I know that his reputation in Iraq was to absolutely minimize collateral damage. He took every damage report as personal and really looked through it. You can't stop it. I do believe that the United States, if we're going to be respected, have to carefully look at collateral damage. I think we have to be willing to own up to it. I think we have to recognize it as a tragedy, and I think we have to take some level of responsibility for it. And I don't know that that is legally required, but I do know that if you want to win, it is. My favorite quote comes from Henry V, and it is this. He says, when he's enforcing the laws of war, he's hanging one of his own troops for looting a church. And the army is not particularly happy. Mm-hmm. But he says this, Henry explains why he is punishing his own soldiers for a crime. He says, when two sides play for a country, the softer goes the quicker. He explains why you obey the rules, and why you do. Not just because they are the rules. I believe we obey the rules because we're Americans. I also believe that obeying the rules helps us win.